You wanted the best. You've got the best podcast. The hottest podcast in the world. The Chris Voss Show, the preeminent podcast with guests so smart you may experience serious brain bleed. The CEOs, authors, thought leaders, visionaries, and motivators. Get ready. Strap yourself in. Keep your hands, arms, and legs inside the vehicle at all times, because you're about to go on a monster education roller coaster with your brain. Now, here's your host, Chris Voss.
Hi, folks. This is Voss here from the ChrisVossShow.com. Welcome to the big show, my family and friends. There you go. The Iron Lady sings it. That makes it bloody official. Welcome to the big show, as always. For the show to your family, friends, and relatives, tell them to join us at goodreads.com/Chris Voss, LinkedIn.com/Chris Voss, Chris Voss one on the TikTokity, and all those crazy places on the internet if we can ever get our soundboard working right here this morning. Anyway, we certainly appreciate you guys being here. We have an amazing author. As always, we only allow amazing authors on the show. We vet them. They have to do, like, you know that thing some people say, it's a special test where you do the cow TV moo thing. I don't know. You may have heard it in politics, but I'm not going to reference it. Yeah, we make them do that test. So they have to identify like animals and, I don't know, add 2 + 2, and then we allow them on the show. He is the author of the latest book. I made him sound really like, I don't know. He's just barely phoning it in on the IQ level. But I assure you, this gentleman has an IQ of at least 300. He's the author of the newest book, The Mighty Moo, the USS Cowpens, and her epic World War II journey from Jinx ship to the Navy's first carrier into Tokyo Bay. Comes out June 11th, 2024. Nathan Canestaro, let me get that right. Nathan Canestaro is on the show with us today. Did I get that right, Nathan?
You got it. And thank you for having me. It's great to be here.
Thanks for coming. We certainly appreciate you. And now be quiet while I read your bio. No, I'm just kidding. So Nathan is a professional intelligence officer whose research, he's just so excited to be here. He can't help it. Whose research on his grandfather's service in World War II led to a decade-long effort to uncover the story of the USS Cowpens and its crew. Currently on assignment to the National Intelligence Council. He has 25 years of experience writing about military operations for policymakers in the U.S. government. He has graduate degrees from the University of Tennessee, Georgetown, and Yale, and lives outside of Washington, D.C. See, I told you this guy's gosh darn smart. Welcome to the show, Nathan. How are you?
I'm doing great. Thank you very much for having me.
I've got you rolling. All right, so give us your .coms. Where can people find you on the webs? Is it themightymoo.com?
Right. Well, no, the other website is nathancanestaro.com. I'm on Twitter. This all one word, Nathan Canestaro. But if you get on Amazon or Barnes & Noble or Target or Walmart, any of the big booksellers, and just search The Mighty Moo, you'll find the book.
I think you should buy the domain moo.com. I think that'd be funny. Might be expensive, though.
Check and see if somebody's already got that one, but that's a good point.
Yeah, there's probably some milk companies got that. So speaking of milk, let's drink up your latest book. What the hell is that about? The Mighty Moo. Give us a 30,000 overview of what's inside.
Sure. So I started researching this book to find out about my grandfather's service in World War II. And he was a tail gunner on a torpedo bomber in the Pacific and served aboard a light aircraft carrier called the USS Cowpens. Now, my grandfather was a lot like many men from his generation. He didn't like to talk about the war. You saw a lot of action. It was traumatic. When he came home, he wanted to put it behind him. But every so often, he'd kind of hint at things that had happened to him. And for a guy like me, I'm interested in World War II history and grew up with Band of Brothers and Saving Private Ryan. That was like catnip. That there was Grandpa had a story there, and he wasn't going to tell it to me. So after he passed in 2010, I decided to go looking into it, see what I could find out on my own. And I found this incredible underdog story about his ship and his crew. So it was a ship that the Navy initially didn't want, with a captain that had nearly been scapegoated for the loss of his last command. The crew had been in uniform barely longer than the ship had been afloat. The pilots self-trained on the planes they'd fly into battle. And the first few months that she was in service, she had a terrible sort of string of bad luck as Jinx. And yet, despite all these problems, the ship that nobody expected much from, she earned a distinguished combat record, survived a deadly typhoon, and ended up the only U.S. aircraft carrier in Tokyo Bay to see the Japanese surrender.
Wow.
Yeah.
Was that because so many of them have been destroyed with Pearl Harbor in the war?
Well, almost exactly the opposite. So, now we know when the Japanese surrendered that they meant it, but at the time, a lot of people didn't trust them. Admiral Halsey thought the whole thing might be a trap.
It's a trap.
That they would sort of invite the Americans in, say they're going to surrender, and then attack them, double cross them. So. Cowpens was essentially sent in because she was expendable. Admiral Halsey wanted all his big carriers out at sea where they'd be safe. We can, if we lose the Cowpens, it'll be okay.
Well, you had to watch those tricky pre-war Japanese. See how I said pre-war Japanese? The post-war Japanese are wonderful people.
Well, these are guys who lived through Pearl Harbor, so they were pretty suspicious.
Pretty tricky, the Pearl Harbor on us.
Yeah.
They pulled that. So, I can see why there was maybe some issues with trust.
Yeah.
So I'd never heard of the USS Cowpens. When I was a kid, I used to read a lot of books, and I'd buy the models of all this stuff, and I'd read about Eisenhower and General MacArthur and all the great generals and stuff. And then so where does the USS Cowpens? Where does that name come from? Is it just like Old MacDonald's farm or something? Or what's going on there?
At the time, aircraft carriers were named after battles, and the Battle of the Cowpens was a Revolutionary War era battle in upstate South Carolina, and it was one of the finest tactical victories of the war. Set the stage for Yorktown, but it's kind of obscure. It's not like Yorktown or Saratoga or any of the others. So it took this little town. There is a place called Cowpens, South Carolina, that's named after the battle. They sent President Roosevelt a postcard in 1942 and said, "Hey, can you name a carrier after our battle?" And the rest is history.
Wow. How come it wasn't how come it's been kind of obscured, or it seems to have been obscured?
Well, it wasn't. The simplest answer is it was not a regular carrier.
Oh.
When you think about World War II carriers, you think about the big ones like the Intrepid in New York City or Yorktown or any of the others. But the thing is, the U.S. A lot of people forget how badly things were going for the United States in the first year of the war. We started with 6 aircraft carriers, and by the end of 42, 4 had been sunk in battle.
Oh wow!
So we were running out of flat tops in a hurry, and President Roosevelt, even before the war, was worried that we didn't have enough. So he tried to get the Navy to take some ships that were already under construction, these light cruisers. So they're about 40% of the size of a big carrier, and put a flat top on them, and so the flight deck. And the Navy didn't like this idea. They liked their big, expensive platforms, and FDR really basically had to force them into it.
Wow.
So they built 9 of these little ships, and they were just a stopgap measure in between, the ships that they'd lost at the beginning of the war and then the big Essexes that were coming along later. So honestly, if the U.S. hadn't been doing as badly as they had, they probably wouldn't have made them at all. So the fact that they're kind of now overlooked is not surprising.
So they had 6 at the beginning of the war, and they went down to they lost 4, so they were down to 2 basically. Wow, that's crazy.
The situation was so desperate there for a while that we actually asked the Brits if they could loan us an aircraft carrier for 90 days. They sent the Invincible into the Pacific, so we could put Enterprise into the shipyard to patch up her battle wounds. It was pretty touch and go there for a while.
You know what we weren't out of, though?
What's that?
Nuclear bombs.
A little later in the game, yeah.
Yeah, we're a little shy on aircraft carriers, but plenty of nuclear bombs. That's a Hiroshima joke, folks. I think I'm going to get hate mail after that. Anyway, guys, so give us a little bit of your background. Tell us a little bit about your grandfather. Were you trying to pry this out of him all these years, and you just couldn't get out of him? You were asking everybody, and then what made you, get into the business you're in? You're obviously writing for the government and probably doing secret stuff that you can't tell us about without murdering us.
Well,
in a secret prison in Poland or something.
Hardly. Grandpa was a very introspective guy. He was not the sort of guy that we would want to draw attention to himself. And he just wouldn't talk about it. He came home, got married, had 5 kids, became a carpenter in upstate New York. And, that was his life. And he would hint about a few things. He talked about the typhoon. We can get into that in a second. But oftentimes when he told stories. They were humorous or funny. He was trying to emphasize the light parts of the experience. But he did see a lot of action. And, when he passed, and the Navy is very good at its record keeping. So there was a huge pile of documents, once you start looking for it. And then I started accumulating letters and diaries and things like that, which have helped me sort of piece the story together. And, you asked a little bit about my job. Being an intelligence officer is like being a historian where you don't know the ending. So, with it's, say, for instance, like D-Day, a historian will look at D-Day and say, well, they won, they did well. Now go back and figure out how it is that they did well. And, in my job, we do the opposite. So with history, it's a nice change to sort of be able to know how the story ends and kind of be able to work back from there.
There you go. So they saw a lot of action in the Pacific there then.
Yes.
Yeah. I did too in the Pacific. I saw a lot of action, but it was mostly on my trip to Thailand. Not sure what that means. Anyway, so tell us about this typhoon thing.
Yeah. So December 1944. Nice transition there, by the way. Cowpens is sailing. General MacArthur had just invaded Leyte, one of the islands in the Philippines, and Cowpens and the fleet were sailing there to help him out. And meteorology wasn't in the 40s what it is today. You have no satellite imagery. You don't know where the storms are, and they sailed right into the teeth of an enormous typhoon. And this is one of the things about the ship, because it was never really intended to be a carrier. It was narrow and tall, had a very high center of gravity. So it was a little, shall we say, tippy in bad weather. And you go sailing into a storm with 70 and 90 foot waves and winds of 100 to 120 knots. The ship is rolling back and forth. There was a roll meter on the bridge, and it went 45 degrees to either side. And apparently the needle was roll over to the pin at 45 degrees and bounce, and then swing back the other direction and then bounce on that needle. So this went on for hours.
You don't want to be eating dinner about that time.
Well, the captain got on the PA and said, anyone who is not on duty, get into your bunks and tie yourself in. Because people were, walking on the walls, the ship is tilting so much and falling and getting hurt.
What's really bad is if you're walking on the roof.
That's usually not a good sign.
Bad. Yeah, that's a whole Poseidon thing right there. That's another movie. It's a different book.
Didn't they remake that not long ago?
I think they did, and it was probably awful. You can't remake certain movies.
No, the original is always better.
Yeah.
But the edge of the flight deck was dipping into the ocean. The flight deck's 70 feet above the water in average seas, and apparently on the bridge they could reach out and touch the waves. And then down in the magazine, the bombs broke loose. They were rolling across the floor, 500 and 1,000 pound bombs, just sort of bouncing like tennis balls. I mean, just a really, really close call. And elsewhere in the fleet, three destroyers capsized and sunk, killed almost 800 guys.
Oh no!
So it was. Grandpa never talked about the combat, but he did talk about this storm, and he was terrified. And I think almost everybody aboard was.
Wow. Yeah, I mean, if it's pitching that far back and forth. I mean, that's just crazy. But as long as you're not walking on the roof, things are fine. You might be walking on the walls, though, right? At that point, really,
it's bad.
I don't think we're supposed to be this far over, folks. But you don't want to have seasickness issues on that ride. There you go. That's why I stay on land, folks. I don't do cruises. Although there were some times in Vegas where I drank enough to where my needle was going all the way over, and I was probably walking on the walls. But
patrons are advised not to leave the bar while it is in motion.
Yeah, the judge says I can't do that anymore. Anyway, what are some other tease outs you want to tease out of the book that people should know to get them to pick it up?
Well, one of the things I like most about researching the book is finding some of these fascinating personalities. And one of them was a guy by the name of Clem Craig, and Clem was the Cowpens' greatest fighter ace. And he finished the war with 12 and a half aerial kills and 2 Navy crosses, which is a pretty good record. But he was an amazing shot with the guns on his fighter aircraft there, the F6F Hellcat.
Wow.
You remember these things only had 400 rounds for each of their guns, so that's about 30 seconds of fire. And he had one mission where he shoots down 4 aircraft in one mission, and another one where he shoots down 5.
Wow.
So he's averaging 5 to 6 seconds of shooting to shoot down an enemy fighter. That's pretty amazing marksmanship for in the middle of a dogfight.
Yeah. That is pretty good. You're in the air too.
Moving all around.
It's not like you have a static sort of thing.
Yeah, he went on to fly another 30 missions in Korea. So a really, really remarkable guy.
That's a guy you want on your Modern Warfare 3 team.
He was a pretty intense customer. He's a very, kind of stern, devoted to duty sort of guy. But
those guys back then were salty, man. They were salt of the earth people, man.
They really were.
Nowadays, kids are like, I got a hangnail. I can't go on the aircraft carrier.
Well, if you want to talk endurance, I should tell you about a guy by the name of Bob Price. Bob was the commander of their first fighter squadron, and he was shot down over the Pacific attacking a Japanese convoy in June of 1944. And they saw him alive in the water in his raft, and he waved back at them. His wingmen were circling overhead, say, "I'm okay, I'm fine." And so they came back to rescue him, and they couldn't find him. So they hadn't accounted for his drift on the currents. They staged 2 rescue missions, never found the guy. Wow. And 10 days later, one of his buddies on another carrier had this dream that Bob Price was out there in the Pacific floating in his raft waiting for someone to pick him up. So he went and he talked to his admiral, a guy by the name of Jocko Clark. And Jocko didn't think he was nuts. He says, well, let's see where he might be. So they sat down with a map and calculated the currents and said, well, if he's still alive, he's probably over here. And it was 100 miles out of their way. So they made a 100-mile detour. Who should they find in his life raft after 11 days but Bob Price?
What about you assholes to wait 10 days?
Guy lost 30 pounds in 11 days.
I think I need to go on that diet. That sounds like...
I don't recommend it.
Yeah. And as long as I can... Well, I was going to say as long as I can take sunscreen, but I might drink the sunscreen. So that might be bad. Yeah, you don't want to drink that seawater. So there you go. I mean, this sounds like a lot of fun. You're going to bring back a ship. I swear to God, when I was a kid, I was building like all the ships, the model ships. Mm-hmm. And then I would read about Eisenhower and the Battle of Midway, and like I was really enthralled with all that stuff. And I build the fighter planes. And what was the other book I read? The one about John F. Kennedy when he was in the war with the PT boats.
PT 109, yeah.
Yeah, I was just obsessed with the whole. I don't know why. I just loved it. That's kind of what you did, it was us against the USSR back then instead of where we're like trying to embrace them now, become them. And it was kind of a different time.
It was a different time.
Where they used to be our enemies, at least for certain parties. Anyway, so I loved this whole thing. And it was such an interesting time because there's a strategy of it all.
Yes.
And, we really got, destroyed with Pearl Harbor. I mean,
right.
It was and we were lucky on a few fronts that some things didn't go as bad as they were, but it could have been worse. But I mean, we really, they did a good number on us, but we came back as Americans. We kicked ass and took names, but thankfully we never ran out of nuclear bombs.
Well, it was a long haul. I mean, 41 to 45, it wasn't easy. There were a lot of tough battles along the way.
Oh yeah.
And if you were, one of the reasons I wrote the book, is trying to figure out, like, my grandfather, he's a 22-year-old kid from upstate New York. He's never been anywhere. He's never been outside of his home region. That was pretty common in those days. You don't travel like you do today. What was it like for him? What was the ship like? The food, the living conditions. He and 1,400 of his closest friends are packed into this metal can in the middle of the South Pacific with no air conditioning. It was not always a pleasant experience.
Yeah.
And the only recreation at times was, they'd let them off in these little islands in the middle of nowhere and say, okay, everybody gets 2 beers and you can go swimming.
Yeah. Did they look familiar when they're out there? No, I'm just kidding. I think that.
One of the missions, you make the joke. One of the missions they were going on is a place called Truk, and it was an island that the Japanese had made into one of their fortresses, and there was all these crazy rumors about this island. And one of them was that Amelia Earhart, she was shot down trying to take intelligence pictures of Truk. Of course, not true, but that was. We know a lot about the Pacific right now, but at the time, some of these places were just total mysteries. They didn't know what was there, what it was like. That's not like you could take overhead pictures, aerial pictures like on Google Earth like you can today.
Yeah, I mean, what was that? Didn't they find like 1 or 2 like Japanese soldiers who for like 30 years stayed on those islands and they thought they were still fighting the war?
I think it was in Saipan. Yeah, some of those guys were coming out of caves and until the 1970s.
Yeah.
They
crazy.
Were pretty determined adversary. Yeah. I mean, you can't.
They were. I mean, the Japanese. I mean, that was the reason we had to nuke them. Is they were they were, kamikazes. I remember studying the kamikaze missions, reading about the kamikaze fighters. Those boys were committed over there, and they weren't kidding around. So,
Yeah.
but glad we all worked it out and we all learned to get along, at least on that side of the globe. Well, technically Russia's on that side of the globe. So there you go. So give people a final pitch out, final thoughts as we go out to pick up the book.
Well, the timing on this is great in that we're coming up on Father's Day, and a lot of people have relatives that served in World War II. Something like 60% of Americans of military age were in the military in some capacity. So for folks, if you like World War II history or you have a relative who served, I think this is a great tribute for Father's Day, or Memorial Day has just passed. And these stories are important if you don't kind of dig into your own family history and learn what sort of part your family had in the big drama. They get lost. So this was my effort to give that tribute to my granddad.
There you go. Just right after the Battle of Normandy recognition, 80 years I think it was, or 70 some odd years.
80, yeah. June was a big month. They capture D-Day. You had D-Day, you had capture of Rome, and then the Battle of the Marianas Turkey Shoot, all in June 44.
There you go. Back when we used to kick ass and take names, and we were always out of bubble gum. There's a reference. So thanks very much for coming on the show. I think this is awesome, man. The Mighty Moo. I thought I knew of all the different things that were in that theater, but now I just learned something new, and I'm also hungry for milk. So
there you go.
This show has been brought to you by milk.
The American Dairy Council.
It makes some people fart like me. So thank you very much, Nathan. WeGetYou.com so people can find you on the interwebs.
Yeah, at Nathan Canestaro, on the service formerly known as Twitter, and then NathanCanestaro.com on the web, and then on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, any booksellers, you search The Mighty Moo, you'll find it.
There you go. Twitter, formerly Twitter, X.com, coming to a bankruptcy court near you. Thank you very much, Nathan, for coming on the show. Order the book wherever fine books are sold, folks. June 11th, 2024. The Mighty Moo. Moo. I feel like I should have to do the soundbite on that. The Mighty Moo, the U.S. Cowpens in her epic World War II journey from Jinx ship to the Navy's first carrier into Tokyo Bay. Thanks to everyone for tuning in. Be good to each other. Stay safe. We'll see you next time, or else.
Thank you.